Hello, and welcome to Super Deep Movie Analysis. I'm actor and filmmaker Lec Zorn, and if you're a fan of The Shining, and you live here in America at least, today is the day, finally, when the long-awaited sequel to The Shining is released, Doctor Sleep. It actually came out in the United Kingdom, and maybe some other countries too, 8 days ago, appropriately on Halloween, October 31st. Today, in America, the release date is... yeah, well, today, November the 8th. And anyway, back a few months ago, I did a super deep analysis of the trailer, of the first trailer. And since then, another trailer has been issued for the movie. And so I'm going to do a super deep analysis of that one. And, you know, I remember when I was a kid... I think, and keep in mind, to put this in perspective, I'm 48 now. I turn 50 next year on December 14th. And when I was a kid, trailers, they were, I remember them being referred to as previews in those days. And they generally, I think most of the time, movies just had one trailer. And I didn't realize that a lot of movies had two trailers until just a few years ago. When my frequent collaborator Michelle Gusso and I were we super deep analyzed the two trailers for the movie Creed together, and then last year I alone, because Michelle and I never coordinated our schedules well enough to do it, I did an episode on the two trailers for Creed 2 together, and in each case they had a similar pattern. There was one trailer that was released 4 or 5 months before the movie that was relatively vague, and then a more explicit trailer that was released about 2 or 3 months before the movie. And that was the case with Dr. Sleep as well. And one thing that I'm wondering about is if it's part of the new marketing strategy. You know, when I was a kid, movies generally were not... there was no advertising whatsoever for movies until very shortly before their releases. I think you might have started to see the trailers in theaters 6 weeks before the release. Not a long time. And then the 1989 movie, the Tim Burton movie Batman, the first Michael Keaton Batman movie, was the first movie that I remember in which the advertising started, 6 months or more in advance. Like, I think they had posters in movie theaters. I think it was released in June, and I think they started having posters in the movie theaters the December before, and now it's the pre-release advertising has gotten so crazy. So maybe that's the reason for doing the multiple trailers. Maybe they figure that, if you only do one trailer, then that won't give people enough to talk about. And if you release a more explicit trailer, and I mean explicit from a standpoint of giving more information about the film, that, people will, only talk about it for a few weeks, and, the movie will sort of be old news by the time it's released. So I don't know if that's the strategy or not, but it's the best thing I can come up with, So anyway, I'm going to get into the second Dr. Sleep trailer now, and I'm going to try not to rehash a whole lot of information from the first episode, the episode on the first Dr. Sleep trailer. I don't want there to be too much overlapping, but, there might be times when, it's necessary. So anyway, I'll do the best I can. And that first trailer took 40-some minutes for a... 2-minute trailer, so that shows what a super deep analytical person I am. And I've always been extremely analytical, which is why, I, affectionately and humorously called this webcast Super Deep Movie Analysis. Just just making light of just one aspect of my personality. So anyway, the trailer starts off amid eerie sound effects. We see a car driving through the mountains like at the beginning of The Shining, the Stanley Kubrick version. And then we see the adult Danny, played by a Scottish actor, Ewan McGregor, opening the two main doors to the overlook and going through several parts of the hotel, including the hallway where Jack walked to the gold room, where Jack, one of my favorite dark humor moments of the Shining is when Jack, has just been falsely accused of beating Danny, and he's walking through the halls going like, stuff like that. In fact, I plan to parody that in an upcoming comedy movie that I'm working on, currently called the Duncan movie. Duncan being my son's character, a mischievous little boy who's obsessed with elevators, like my son is in real life. But anyway, so then after that, then we see the adult Danny. Excuse me, I already got to that part. So anyway, then we see Danny in the caretaker quarters of the Overlook, where he sees the door that Jack axed through. The room now looks like it hasn't been maintained in decades, and then he also looks through the hole in the door that Jack looked through and famously said, "Here's Johnny." And I don't know if these clips are actually going to appear in the movie or not, but maybe they are, or maybe it's just being used to emphasize that this is the sequel to The Shining. But anyway, then we hear Danny talking apparently to Abra Stone, the approximately 12-year-old girl, who's, I guess, the lead female character, at least the female good character in the film. And Danny says, "When I was a kid, there was a place, a dark place. They closed it down and let it rot. But the things that lived there," and then at that point, we see the empty hallway. We see an empty hallway while the Grady twins are heard saying, "Hello, Danny." Then we get an extremely quick shot of the twins, and it's probably extremely quick, as if you pause it, it's obviously not Lisa and Louise Burns, the twins from the original. And then amid a black screen, the sound effects suddenly stop as Danny says, "They come back." Then we see the Warner Brothers logo, and then the eerie sound effects start again. Then we see a day shot of a rural road that shows a lot of farmland, and I suspect that this is going to be somewhere somewhere in New England, as a lot of Stephen King's works tend to be set there. Now, The Shining wasn't, although, as you might remember, it was said that the family had just moved to Boulder, Colorado from Vermont. And, of course, as you might know, Stephen King actually wrote the book The Shining. It was influenced by a visit to the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, which is in the far north of the state near the Wyoming border. And the hotel actually had just closed. The last night was the last night before closing for the winter, but they let him stay that night anyway. And that served as the inspiration for the book. And by the way, while he was there, he was served drinks by a man named Grady. So obviously got a lot of inspiration from that. But anyway, then after the shot of the farmland, we see a shot of a bus in a small town with some kind of building, possibly a hospital on the left and a house on the immediate right, and possibly a store and a courthouse further in the distance on the right. During that shot, a voiceover begins and then continues as we see it's a middle-aged, racially mixed man talking to Danny. The man says, "Not many ride the bus this far north. You running away from something?" Then we see Danny lying in bed looking scared. His arms are folded and there is another arm around him with a hand on his abdominal area. The hand looks pale and possibly lifeless, so apparently it's not a romantic moment with a wife or girlfriend. Danny slowly starts to get out of bed and the hand grabs at him. He is shown losing his balance, then falling to the ground and seeing nothing on the bed. Then we see Danny talking to the same racially mixed man and saying, "I'm running away from myself, I guess." We see the conversation is on a sidewalk in apparently the same small town. Then we see Danny with no shirt on looking apprehensively at himself in the mirror. Then the screen goes to black and the words "based on Stephen King's best-selling novel" appear on the screen. Then we see Danny sitting on the front of his bed dressed and hearing a ghost-type young female voice say, "Hi." Then we see that he's looking at the wall in front of him and the word "hello" is written with what looks like chalk. There is a smiley face in the O. And I mentioned that especially because there were a few smiley faces in the O's that were there were of the words that were shown written in the original trailer. There were several smiley faces in the O's as well. So I don't know if that's significant or not, but it is something I thought was an interesting observation. And anyway, then the voice that first says hi then continues, "You can hear me." That fades into Abra Stone, played by Kyliegh Curran, suddenly sitting up in bed. Now, Abra is the young girl, again, approximately 12 years old, who has the Shining and who Danny tries to rescue. Anyway, then that fades into Abra and Danny sitting on a park bench together, and Abra saying, "You're magic, like me." Danny responds, "I don't know about magic. I always called it the Shining." Then we see the child Danny sitting on his tricycle in the overlook with the famous carpet pattern that supposedly looks like the launch pad of the Apollo 11. If you want to know more about that, go to YouTube and check out the movie The Shining Code 2.0, which I plan to super deep analyze later. And anyway, Danny, again, he's sitting on his tricycle in the overlook with the famous carpet pattern and looking at room 237, which opens apparently by itself. Then we see a blonde woman who appears to be in her 20s and wearing a fairly short skirt is walking away from a movie theater, apparently also in a small town at night. She's carrying an item in her left hand, possibly a coat or jacket, and a man who looks a little older is following her from about 20 feet back. He's bearded with shoulder-length hair and is wearing an open jacket and a cowboy hat. And interestingly, by the way, the marquee of the theater simply says theater, and the movie listed on the marquee is Casablanca. And that itself, the Casablanca part, isn't unusual because some movie theaters do show classic movies like that, which I think is a great idea. That, in fact, I just saw The Shining for the first time in the theater 3 years ago. I think it was TMC or Turner Classic Movies, or one of those. It was one of the classic movie channels that sponsored it. I saw it at a theater in Plainfield, Indiana, back in 2016, 35 years after I first saw it on Showtime. And so, it's always great to see a classic movie like that theatrically when you have the opportunity. But as for the movie theater simply saying theater, I really wonder if that's going to be digitally changed for the theatrical release. And as a point of reference, in the second Creed trailer, at one time you see when Rocky is talking about, he makes some sort of comment like, "Everything in my life has moved on and I'm here," and then we see him at the grave of his brother-in-law Paulie, and that was how it was established to the audience that Paulie was dead. And it has the month and year of his date of birth and death, but not the day of the month. However, in the final cut, the days of the month were listed. So, apparently, that was digitally added as well. But anyway, let's see where I'm trying to find my okay, so yeah, it'll be interesting to see if if the marquee just says theater in the final cut, or if they've added something to it to give the theater a name other than simply theater, because I've never seen such a theater in my life, and not sure there is such a place. But anyway, so then we see the man get the attention of the woman, possibly by touching her on the arm. It's hard to tell because the two people are only shown from a little below their shoulders on up. The woman turns to the man and looks startled, and then over shots of those two people, Danny says, apparently still talking to Abra, "The world is a hungry place." Then we see a shot from possibly high up on a construction site where there are two RVs and a pickup truck. The headlights of the pickup truck and one of the RVs are turned on, while Danny continues, "A dangerous place." So his full message is, the world is a hungry place, a dangerous place. Then we cut to the woman who is walking away from the movie theater, possibly, possibly, then we cut to the woman who is walking away from the movie theater. She's lying on the ground while Rose the Hat, who's the main bad guy, or I guess main bad girl in the film. She's played by Swedish actress Rebecca Ferguson. She's kneeling over the young blonde woman from the opposite direction, and the two are looking face to face. The girl looks nervous while Rose looks like she is about to methodically kill the girl and seems to be gaining power from it. Steam is coming out of her mouth, and it doesn't seem to me like it's seeing her breath in cold weather. And I did read, I think it was on the synopsis of the book Dr. Sleep, which was released in 2013, that Rose the Hat, and members of her group, which is called the True Knot, not spelled Knot, gain power from the steam that they absorb when they torture to death people who have the Shining. So maybe what we see coming out of Rose's mouth is actually that steam. So anyway, then we see a shot over the girl with her face turned upside down. Excuse me. Then we see a shot from over the girl with her face upside down on the screen, with Rose's open right hand under the backside of the girl's head. The girl looks terrified for her life. Then the girl widely opens her mouth, possibly to scream, and then Rose and several others are shown, possibly members of the True Knot. Most are kneeling, but one is standing and leaning over. Rose suddenly turns her head to the right as if she just heard something. Then we see Danny and Abra on the park bench again, with Abra saying, "These people, they hurt people like us." Then we see a quick shot in low light where we see what looks like a campfire that's almost burned out, and about 7 people in fast motion swarming to something on the ground, possibly one of their victims. Then amid a black screen, Symphony Fantastique starts playing amid the words on the screen from Warner Brothers Pictures, and some form of that song plays for most of the remainder of the trailer. And for those of you who don't know, Symphony Fantastique by French composer Hector Berlioz is what's playing in the opening of the original Shining, when you see Jack driving toward the Overlook. And it was originally written in 1830 or 31, about 150 years before the original Shining movie. Then we see 4 people, one of whom is the man who followed the woman from the movie theater, standing in a forest, all several feet apart. Of the other 3, 2 are men and 1 is a woman. They look like young to middle-aged adults. Then we see a girl innocently approach Rose, who is sitting on a tree stump in front of a lake. Then we see the same 4 people plus another young adult female walking toward the camera menacingly. Among those 3 shots, we hear a voiceover from Dick Halloran, now played by Carel Lumbly, saying, "These empty devils, they'll eat what shines. These empty devils, they'll eat what shines." Then some kind of impact. Then we see a wall where there's some kind of impact. And then we see a scared-looking Danny looking in the mirror and seeing the word "Red Rum" in the reflection on the wall. Then we see Halloran, and he begins by saying, "And they've noticed that little girl." During the latter part of that voiceover, we see Abra standing in a room with her eyes open, but they are just plain white. You don't see the iris or the pupil or anything. And then we see Rose in a grocery store. Rose in a grocery store saying, "Well, hi there." while standing in front of the milk. Amid the latter part of that line, we see Abra in a house, and a white female hand slowly moves behind her head, then touches her, and she suddenly shakes in fear. Sounding panicked, she shouts, "Get out of my head, get out." Then we see the grocery store again. The glass in front of the milk suddenly explodes outward, knocking Rose down. Then, amid Rose sitting up on the grocery store floor in shock, sitting up on the grocery store floor in shock, we hear okay. Let me start over again. My notes are a little confusing here. Anyway, so then we see Rose sitting up on the grocery store floor in shock. Then we see her talking to someone in the forest, and then we see individual shots of her and Abra. And over that we hear Rose say, "I haven't felt power like that in so long." Then we see Abra and a middle-aged black man, apparently her father, standing in a house, and she says, "They're coming." Then we see a bathtub with the curtain starting to open, and we get a quick glimpse of a woman, but I'm not sure who she is. I'm not sure if it's supposed to be the woman from the I'm not sure if it's supposed to be the woman from the room 237 bathtub or not. Then we see Abra in a house looking very nervous and shaking her head. Then, as eerie music starts, a black screen, we go to a black screen with the words "on November 8th." And then, amid a view of the Colorado mountains similar to what's shown at the beginning of The Shining, except this time at night, we hear a voice over from Abra, apparently asking Danny, "Where are we going?" Then we see the front of the overlook amid heavy snow in dim light, as if the sun is rising or setting, as if the sun is just around the horizon. Then Danny and Abra are shown in a car, and Danny says, "There's a place." Then the two are shown outside the parked car in the parking lot, where Danny is looking around tensely. Then we get another black screen with the words "The World." Then a frontal close-up of Danny sitting on the floor in his room, then a side shot of the room then a side shot as the room leans forward, and Danny starts sliding, and then we get a shot from behind him as he's about to crash into a wall that reads "Murder" spelled forward. It doesn't say "Red Rum," it says "Murder" this time. Then we see Danny standing in a room. I can't tell if it's a house or a business, and he asks Abra, "You sure you want to do this?" Then we see Abra say, "I'm ready," as the aforementioned man, who is apparently her father, looks very concerned. Then we see a scared-looking Abra with her body stretched out as if it's flying, seemingly in her room looking out the window, and then her body quickly moves back, apparently beyond her control. Then a black screen with the words, then we go to a black screen with the words "Will shine again," thus making the full message, "On November 8th, the world will shine again." Then we see Rose the Hat in the hedge maze at the overlook, and then a close-up of a knife dripping blood, along with a voiceover from Rose saying, "Yes, you run, dear." Then we see the woman who walked out of the movie theater alone, sitting. No, excuse me. Then we see the woman who walked out of the movie theater sitting next to a middle-aged man, both looking down at something and apparently in deep and concerned thought. Then we see Danny walking through the hallway, possibly through the overlook, as the voiceover from Rose continues, saying, "And then I will find you." Near the end of that voiceover, we see Abra lying down, I think in the back seat of a car, while she and Danny, who apparently is sitting in the front seat, touching their palms together. Then we see Abra looking like she's in a trance and suddenly sticking her arms out and making a steering motion to her left as if she's casting a spell. And then we see a van crash, then break apart, revealing a person who is only dimly visible, far too dim to know who the person is. Then over the last part of that shot, we see Rose talking in front of the overlook elevators, and a shot of Rose sitting on Danny and choking him. and then we hear another, and then over those three shots, we hear another voiceover from Rose saying, "And you will scream for years," thus making the entire message, "Yes, yes, you run, dear, and then I will find you, and you will scream for years." Then we see Rose's face as she continues to choke Danny. Then we see Rose's face as she continues to choke Danny. Then she looks up, and then we see the blood coming out of the elevators. Then we see Danny lying on the ground, and back lower body view of the Grady twins walking into frame, saying, "Come and play with us." Then among a black screen, their voices continue forever and ever. Then we see Danny's face with several hands reaching out to him and one hand covering his mouth. And then finally, a black screen reading Dr. Sleep. And then the black screen continues with the words November 8th, and then the credits. So, a lot packed into that trailer, which runs 2 minutes and 24 seconds. So anyway, I'm going to try to see Dr. Sleep today. I'm almost certain I'll see it sometime this weekend. Let me see here. It's got a $45 million budget, and which these days for a major studio movie is actually not that much. Probably about average for a major studio movies. Of course, some of the superhero movies run into the hundreds of millions. And you know, obviously there are going to be some special effects in this one, but probably not as overblown as in a lot of the movies these days. I don't know if there's... I don't see many major studio movies anymore, so I really don't know how big any of these actors are. I know Ewan McGregor was in one of the recent Star Wars movies, so I guess he probably commands a lot of money. But I doubt that there's going to be a whole lot of... I mean, I doubt there's anybody who's going to make, $20 million on this. I doubt there's anybody who has paid $20 million to be in this movie or anything like that. And with these major studio movies that have the super high budgets, one of the reasons is that the salaries that the big stars these days, the salaries that the big stars make these days are so big. And to put it in contrast, most of the people who are in The Godfather, which is regarded by many people, including possibly me, as the best movie of all time. I certainly think it's up there if it's not the best. Most of the main actors in that movie made $25,000 to $50,000 off of it, which even adjusted for inflation today, it would be in the low six figures. It wouldn't be anywhere near the millions. But anyway, the movie is, let's see, okay, the movie is supposed to be opening on 3,800 screens, and keep in mind at the time that the original came out, major releases usually opened on 600 or 700 screens, and then finally it was, I think it was with Jurassic Park that cinemas got the idea that, why not show the same movie on more than one screen, which is why movies don't stay in theaters so long anymore. I think that the Star Wars movie Return of the Jedi, if I remember correctly, was like #1 movie for I think the first 16 weeks, and you could never do that today because yeah, I mean, you could never do that today because there's just... movies can make so much more money so quickly, and people who want to see a movie badly enough, they usually don't have to wait weeks or months anymore. Like I remember my father taking my brother and me to the Showcase Cinemas in Louisville, Kentucky to see Return of the Jedi, and back then the only way to get tickets to a movie was to stand in line. You couldn't order online. This is 1983. You just had to go stand in line, and we were there too late, so we ended up going to another cinema and seeing Space Hunter in 3D, which actually, I thought was a pretty decent, fun science fiction flick. But and then we ended up seeing Return of the Jedi, I think, I don't know, 2-3 months later when it cooled down. But so anyway, And keep in mind that like today's like super big time new releases, I think they open like around right around 5,000 screens. So Doctor Sleep, not too much below that. It's been released. It's being released alongside Midway, Playing with Fire, and Last Christmas. I have no idea how big those movies are expected to be, but anyway, Doctor Sleep, according to Wikipedia, is projected to gross 25 to 30 million here in its opening weekend, which is very good, but not extraordinary these days. And anyway, according to Box Office Magazine, quote, early social and trailer trends are indicative of a potential box office hit should reviews and audience reception prove favorable. However, that article added, Doctor Sleep's primary barrier to breakout status could be how reliant it is on younger audience. Doctor Sleep's primary barrier to breakout status could be how reliant it is on younger audience familiarity with the source Stephen King novels and/or The Shining. That crowd has proven to be a big element in the breakout nature of recent horror hits. End of quote. I don't think that's going to be a problem because I am, especially since I've been working in film and talking about, movies a lot more these last 10 years. I found a very high number of young people are very familiar with The Shining and sometimes even diehard fans of it, even people who didn't exist until many years after the movie came out. So I don't think that's going to be a problem. I could be wrong, but anyway, the movie also, let me pull it up on IMDb here. So far, and keep in mind the movie's been released in the United Kingdom for 8 days now, with, wow, it has an even 7,007, okay, yeah, the movie now has 7,777 views. What are the odds of me turning it on when that figure was up there? So maybe that's a lucky sign for me. But anyway, it currently has a user rating of 7.5, which is very good. And to put that in perspective, the original Shining has an 8.4. So that's pretty it's pretty close. However, it should be noted that usually movies that already have a strong built-in following, like sequels or movies that are part of a certain series, they tend to have higher ratings initially than they do over the long term, because initially a lot of diehard fans go to see the movie immediately, and then so that gives the movie a very high initial rating, and then it usually cools down. Like, for example, I remember a few days after the original movie Creed came out, it had an 8.9 on IMDb. Now it has a 7.6, which is very good, but it's not quite, not quite up to extraordinary level. So anyway, let's see here. I know I covered a lot of the plot in the original, in my original super deep movie analysis on the first Doctor Sleep trailer, and I just want to go over a few more things here without rehashing too much. A couple of things I noticed looking at the IMDb profile. First of all, Jack Torrance is a character in this movie, so that was quite a surprise. And let's see here. And anyway, I assume he's just going to be in flashbacks, but he's actually going to be played by, of all people, Henry Thomas, who's best known for playing Elliot in E.T., and he's never had a role anywhere near that famous again, but he has steadily gotten work. He currently has 68 IMDb credits. He's 48 years old, like I am, and he's never gone a long period of time between credits. And so he's playing Jack, and this now gives Henry Thomas the distinction of playing two of the most famous psychopaths in movie history. He also plays Norman Bates in the 1990 movie Psycho for the Beginning, which is actually both a prequel and a sequel to the original Psycho. And anyway, in that movie, we see Anthony Perkins play Norman Bates in the present day, which was the last Anthony Perkins performance as Norman Bates. Perkins died just 2 years later in 1992. And anyway, he calls a talk show where the topic is matricide, that is the killing of one's mother, and he tells his story, and then he tells he tells the story of Norman Bates growing up, and yeah, there's a little kid actor who plays Norman in some of the early scenes, but most of the scenes are teenage scenes in which Norman is played by Henry Thomas, and played very well, by the way. So it'll be interesting to see what Henry Thomas does as Jack in this one, and also it'll be interesting to see, in these flashbacks, if they try to make Henry look or act like Jack Nicholson. Stephen King was not happy with the casting of Jack Nicholson as Jack Torrance. King wanted John Voight instead. King's thought, and I understand based on King's vision for the story, King wanted it to be a surprise when Jack goes crazy, and assumed, probably correctly, that people would be expecting any Jack Nicholson character to go crazy. That's just, the kind of actor Jack Nicholson is. I mean, he's probably the best crazy guy actor of all time. But anyway, it'll be interesting to see what kind of flashbacks that they give Jack. And then, like I said last time, in the episode on the first trailer, in regards to Halloran being a character, in the book, Danny tries to find Dick Halloran, finds out he died in 1999, but then manages to speak to him from beyond the grave. So since this movie is being marketed as a sequel to the Stanley Kubrick movie The Shining, I would imagine, if the movie simply doesn't say when Halloran died, then showing him in the flashback or showing Danny talk to him from the grave won't be problematic. But if, it's revealed in this movie that Halloran died in 1999, obviously that would be problematic. And I'm amazed that in the trailer that Carl Lumbly actually bears a fairly strong resemblance to Scatman Crothers. So, and then I think I mentioned last time, Alex Esso, who bears a pretty striking resemblance to Shelley Duvall, is shown playing Wendy Torrance. Now, in the book, Wendy is established to have died sometime before the events of the book Doctor Sleep, but maybe she's going to be in flashbacks, or maybe maybe Danny talks to her from the grave too. Although I would think that's less likely, as there's no evidence that Wendy had the Shining. So anyway, just looking at the cast here to see if there's anything else that stands out in my mind. Oh, yeah, one other thing here. Danny Lloyd, who plays Danny in the original, is shown as Spectator. Now, a few days ago, he was shown as Baseball Spectator. Now they listed only as Spectator. But anyway, so I'll be looking for him. I've seen pictures of him in recent years. And anyway, this would only be his third acting credit of his career behind The Shining, and then in 1982, the made-for-TV movie Will, the autobiography of G. Gordon Liddy, in which he plays Liddy as a child. And according to an interview a few years ago with Danny Lloyd, he said he tried to get acting jobs until he was 14 and didn't succeed, and he's gone on to become a science professor or teacher at several schools. I'm not sure where he was now. I know he was at one in Kentucky for a while, and that's just one state south of me. I live here in Indiana. So, and then also I see, and then I see one of the characters is, I see Michael Monks playing Delbert Grady, and let's see here. And he actually, I just looked him up, he actually bears a little bit of a resemblance to Philip Stone, who plays Grady in the original. And then, let's see, the Grady twins are played by Sadie and KK Heim, who I guess are real-life twins. And I'm not familiar with them at all. But then one of the characters also is Horace Derwent, who was never mentioned by name in the Kubrick movie, but was the guy who, in the book and then the miniseries, the 1997 Stephen King made miniseries of The Shining, was the guy who basically rescued the Overlook Hotel after World War II. I say he wasn't mentioned by name in the Kubrick movie. Basically, the book and miniseries established, especially the book established, that he had some odd sexual practices. And so basically, the and that he made one of his lovers dress up in a dog suit. So I guess that guy, who was with the guy in the dog suit who Wendy saw in the original was supposed to be Horace Derwent, even though, like I said, that name was not mentioned. So anyway, as for the trailer, it's intriguing. This trailer, that is the second trailer for Doctor Sleep, it's intriguing, and I trying to look at it from a neutral perspective. If I had never seen the original Shining, this trailer probably wouldn't make me want to rush out and see the movie, but it certainly would grab my attention. And of course, obviously, being such a zealous fan of the original, it's one of my 3 or 4 favorite movies of all time. Certainly my favorite horror movie of all time. I would see it no matter what, even if the trailer were awful. But, I'm excited about it. I will say this, though. One thing that's really changed about trailers since I was a kid is that back then, trailers in general, they often had narration, in which the narrator would go a long way toward revealing the plot. And I've noticed that more and more trailers these days have no narration. And I couldn't really tell you a whole lot about the plot from either of these 2 trailers. But when I piece the trailers together with the synopsis that I read of the book and the synopsis of the movie, then I can, get a pretty good idea of what's what. I don't know if that's a good trend or bad trend. I tend to be an explicit person. When I say that, I don't mean explicit from a standpoint of overtly sexual or profane, but I mean just I like clear, unambiguous communication. I don't like ambiguity a whole lot of the time. I think there are probably some times in which in art it can be effective, but and I do like open-ended movies, open-ended conclusions to movies. I like, in a lot of cases, I like open-ended conclusions to movies where you see that maybe the main character has a choice about where to go from here, and the character might make a good or a bad choice, but we see there is the potential for good from, as the story would continue, or what will happen, that there's the potential for the character to go on to do something good after this. But I don't like to do a lot of guessing, that's just my nature. I just like everything to be very blunt. I know now that I'm starting to make movies, I don't like to leave the viewer guessing, I don't like to leave things to the viewer's interpretation in general. So, anyway, it's one of those things. We'll see how this movie is. I'm expecting that it's going to be good. I don't think it'll be the masterpiece that the original is, simply because, making a movie a masterpiece is something that you don't, you can plan it all you want, but to make it happen, it's the result of so many things that just happen to come together that work very well. So we'll see if that happens or not. I don't think it's going to be bad. I mean, the vast majority of the reviews that I've glanced at on IMDb have been positive, and presumably most of these people who are writing these reviews are fans of the original, as I obviously am. So, I'm going into it with a lot of optimism, a lot of excitement. Um, and as long as I think this is, if this is at least a 3.5 star out of 4 movie, I won't be disappointed. Um, and, it's one of those things, there is a little bit of a balance that I guess they're trying to strike, because Stephen King famously was not crazy about the original, not crazy about the Kubrick movie. Um, and even though I disagree with a lot of his criticisms of it, I think a lot of his criticisms are fair. He just had a different vision than Stanley Kubrick did for the story. And I like, I think that the 1997 miniseries that Stephen King made it's not outstanding, but it's very good. I do recommend it, as long as you go into it understanding that it's not the original, um, and that it's not meant to be. I think it was a mistake that it was made for ABC. I think if he was going to make a miniseries for cable based on The Shining, it should have been. Um, if he was going to make a miniseries for TV based on The Shining, it should have been made for cable, where he wouldn't have had such content restrictions. That is basically trying to squeeze R-rated source material into PG-13 constraints. So, but yeah, I recommend checking out the miniseries, though. But I think that Doctor Sleep seems to be trying to make King happy, because keep in mind, Doctor Sleep was a sequel to King's book, The Shining. Um, and it seems like the movie makers are trying to that they tried to make the Doctor Sleep movie a hybrid, between being a sequel to King's book and being a sequel to Kubrick's movie. So we'll see how well they pull it off. That is a challenge, but I don't think it's insurmountable. Like, for example, like I said last time, um, apparently Danny in the book has become an alcoholic, and is said to be continuing his father's legacy of alcoholism. Well, in the Kubrick movie, excuse me, in the King book, Jack's alcoholism was a major plot element. Kubrick largely downplayed it in the movie, but I think we got just enough of it that it won't be a stretch. That if the Doctor Sleep movie talks about, Danny repeating his father's pattern of alcoholism, I think we can see just enough from the Kubrick movie that Jack, drank too much alcohol. That it wouldn't be a stretch for fans of the Kubrick movie to accept that, to accept that plot element if it were inserted into the Doctor Sleep movie. So, anyway, um, so, and again, I think it's good that, if there was going to be a sequel to The Shining, and certainly what happens to Danny as an adult, very interesting. That's a very interesting thing. Last year, going to the Rocky/Creed movies, it was interesting to see um, the return of Ivan Drago after 33 years. What happened to that character, who finally returned, again played by Swedish actor Dolph Lundgren, as he played the character in Rocky 4 and then in Creed 2. And it's very, very interesting result, in Creed 2 to see what happened to the character. And great performance by Dolph Lundgren. So, anyway, it's interesting. Both of these movies, Creed 2 and now um, Doctor Sleep, each have a Swede in a prominent role. And I happen to be a Swedish American myself. Rebecca Ferguson is Swedish. Her real last name is Sundström. If I remember correctly, I think she had a British mother and a Swedish father, and she grew up bilingual. Um, Certainly she seems to talk. And Ewan McGregor, being Scottish, based on the trailer, they both speak English with a perfect American accent. So, you know, it's it's really, you never know how things are going to turn out. Accents are something that, I don't have much experience with speaking in any accent other than mine. Um, and I'd like to try that again someday. I would like to try that again sometime, ever, because that's something I have very little experience in. Just a few lines here and there. I've tried to speak with a foreign accent. Like one time I had a few words in German, and we had a German actor on stage who coached me, and he repeated it a bunch of times, and I kept repeating it until he seemed satisfied with it. But I'd like to do a long role in a different accent. That would be a great challenge. So, I don't know. Maybe Evan and Rebecca have lived in America for years and picked it up naturally. I don't know. But it's a great skill to be able to speak, multiple accents. And there are people who can, turn on and off an accent easily. Like I remember one time the Australian singer actor Rick Springfield demonstrated the difference between an American and an Australian accent, and he was able to go from one to the other seemingly with no effort. So I'm just fascinated by stuff like that. So anyway, I think I'm near the end of the episode here. Well, I've actually outdone the first my analysis of the super. I've actually outdone my episode on the first Doctor Sleep trailer by 7 minutes now. That went 44 minutes. This is 51 and counting. And so anyway, I'm going into it with not through the roof expectations, but very good expectations. I think it's going to be entertaining. I think it's going to be a very entertaining movie. I'm prepared for it to be, I'm prepared for it to be disturbing. I hope it doesn't turn into a big gore fest. I know I haven't seen the new Rambo movie yet. I plan to eventually, but I've heard that I've read that the level of gore in that movie is, a lot like a slasher movie, which I was disappointed to hear. But, maybe Stallone, at 73, just feels like to resonate with today's audience, that's the route you got to go. Although I think gore tends to be a crutch more than anything else. I think there's a place for it, but, excessive gore, I think, is usually just a crutch when you don't know how to excite your audience, in a psychological terror way, like the original Shining did. I mean, the fact that it's such a scary movie and Jack only kills one person in the whole movie. So, and it should be noted, by the way, that Stanley Kubrick, even though Halloran did not die in the book, Stanley Kubrick had Jack kill Halloran, just feeling that it was necessary for Jack to kill somebody. And of course, one fundamental difference between the book and the movie is that the book portrays Jack as being basically a good guy who just has these demons, whereas the movie portrays him as being largely just fundamentally bad, irredeemable. So, wow, 39 years, that might be the all-time record from original to sequel. I don't know of any that are longer than that. I know Blade Runner was 35 years from 1982 to 2017. So, we'll see how this one goes. But anyway, I'm optimistic, and I will be doing an episode on Doctor Sleep the movie, hopefully in the next few months. Hopefully I'll get my collaborator Robert Landrum to join me. We live about 2 hours apart, so it's not always easy to coordinate, but if we can do it, I'll certainly invite him. And I also want to do an episode on the Shining miniseries from 1997, as well as a movie called The Shining Code 2.0, which is a documentary that's here on YouTube, and which analyzes the theory that Stanley Kubrick filmed the moon landing, that it was fake, that Stanley Kubrick filmed it and then confessed it in The Shining, which I don't believe that that theory, but I think the movie is interesting, and I think I'll make a good episode. I hope so anyway. So let's see here before I sign off. I think that is everything. One thing I will say before I go, the basic plot of this movie, which is that this group, the True Knot, that they torture to death people who have the Shining and can continue to stay alive that way. Um, Obviously, that has the potential for a lot of gore, but if you do that plot element the right way, you don't have to put gore. You can just make it psychologically disturbing, like the original is. I mean, I know there's the gore of the blood in the elevators, but mostly the original's scary just psychologically, and that which is how movies scared you before the slasher era. So anyway, and I will say this: Stephen King. Let me see how old he is now. Stephen King, I know he's like 72, 73, I think. Okay, he's 72. And so, yeah, at this stage, just like, I've said a few times in recent years that I think Sylvester Stallone at his current age, he's 73 now, he's thinking about his legacy, and he's not going to do anything that's going to dishonor his legacy. And I think that King, obviously, he wasn't going to bring back The Shining if he didn't think it was going to be good. And so... and I think another thing after The Shining, was changed so much after he sold the movie rights, I think probably he has clauses in his contract, in which, he has more artistic control over the movies made on his books. So I think that this, but I think based on what I've observed from King, in the media regarding this movie, I think he also realizes that, it would be dumb not to try to capitalize on the success of the Kubrick movie. So I think I think he's trying to do things that are honoring to his legacy, and also appeal to the fans of the Kubrick movie, or at least reach out to them. And so anyway, the one thing I will say about this this movie, Dr. Sleep, I don't know anything about the director at all. So, let's see, his name is Mike Flanagan, and let me see, he has, on IMDb, 15 director credits. Not familiar with any of them. They're over a period of 19 years. The first was Make Believe back in 2000, so don't know anything about him. Obviously, there was only one Kubrick, but hopefully Flanagan will have his own unique take and be able to make something that honors the Shining legacy. And it's unlikely that this movie will become as beloved or iconic as the original will, but hopefully it'll do a great job telling the story. And and I am glad that King has not let The Shining turn into, one of these Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th type series where there's, all kinds of, sequels that really end up tarnishing, the original, and just cheapening each, well, not necessarily tarnishing the original, but cheapening the value of each individual entry in the series. Star Wars is starting to do that, in these Disney years now with the spin-offs and the prequels and things like that, so... and I think that the fact that this is the first sequel after 39 years, I think that's one reason why there's going to be a lot of interest in fans of the series, although I will say it is interesting that it's, ever since The Godfather Part 2 in 1974, ever since that became the first major movie with a sequential title, most sequels then have had sequential titles, so it's interesting that this one doesn't, but hopefully that won't hurt it. So anyway, all right, well, it's, I'm up to 58 minutes and 56 seconds now, so, better wrap this up, because I got to go to work here soon anyway, and I want to get this uploaded, before the, afternoon showing start of Dr. Sleep. So anyway, hopefully this will be a movie that people will remember in a positive way forever and ever and ever, but, last year in my Creed 2 trailer episode, I mentioned how a new Rocky movie is now it's become roughly a once-a-decade experience, and so now this is almost becoming, it's The Shining in 1980, Dr. Sleep in 2019. That's about a twice, maybe if you're lucky, 3 times in a lifetime experience, so... gonna enjoy it, and you only get to see a movie once for the first time, and hopefully it'll be a great experience for me in a few hours, and I will be reporting to you about it. So, anyway, this concludes the episode. As always, thank you so much for joining me, and I cordially invite you to do so again in the near future for another episode. As always, feel free to subscribe to my channel, to share this video, to like Super Deep Movie Analysis on Facebook. And anyway, and also feel free to write to me on Facebook. I'm easy to find. I'm pretty sure I'm the only Lec Zorn on there. So, and you can also email me at lexzorn@gmail.com. So once again, thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you again soon. And until next time, for Super Deep Movie Analysis, this is Lec Zorn reminding you, there is a difference only you can make.